meet my bride. Let's go for a ride in my newfangled automobile. Just where we will go, nobody knows, but it's sure a great way to feel. Behind the wheel of the speed meter steel, it's my newfangled automobile. Hello and welcome to Vintage Car History. I'm Wild Bill. In the early 1950s, NASCAR was dominated by Hudson cars. Various fabulous Hudson Hornets from 51 to 53 won over 100 races due to their strong straight-six engines, superior suspension, and low center of gravity that kept them stuck to the dirt and sometimes muddy tracks. Many young folks are also aware of this due to the Paul Newman's portrayal of Doc Hudson in the 2006 animated movie Cars. But not as many know how this company came into being. So today, we'll take a look at the early history of Hudson. The story begins in the town of Newcastle upon Tyne, England, where Joseph Lothian Hudson was born in 1846. The family immigrated to Ontario, Canada 9 years later, and a few years after that moved to Michigan. His family were merchants, and thus he learned the mercantile business at a young age. He worked at the family store at first, but moved to Pontiac, Michigan to work at the store owned by C.R. Mabley, which sold men's clothing. Having learned that part of the business, he returned to the family store in Ionia, Michigan, after a few years, but unfortunately that store went out of business during the financial panic of 1873. Mr. Mabley contacted Hudson, asking him to please come back and be his store manager at his quite successful retail store in Detroit, which he did in 1877. However, Hudson and Mabley didn't agree on how to run the store, so Hudson left in 1881 to establish his own clothing store, it being located inside the Detroit Opera House. This new concern grew, and by 1891 had relocated to its own building in the city, incorporating as the J.L. Hudson Company. He greatly expanded the products available to include women's clothing, shoes, and various housewares, making it a true department store, and was the largest of its kind in Michigan and amongst the largest in the country. He hired professional salesmen to work in each department, and by the turn of the century, he was quite a wealthy man. Meanwhile, Roy Chapin was born in Lansing, Michigan in 1880. He received his engineering degree from the University of Michigan and began working for Ransom Olds in 1901 as both an engineer and a test driver. Later that year, Chapin took a curved-dash Olds on a publicity drive from Detroit to New York to be on display at the New York Auto Show. It took him a week to make the trip, the lack of real roads being the primary hindrance. This impacted him significantly, and he would become a major proponent for road construction and improvements, lobbying for the cause. He left Olds in 1906, taking a friend and fellow engineer with him, Mr. Howard Coffin. Together they founded the E.R. Thomas Detroit Company, named after Edwin Ross Thomas of Thomas Flyer fame, who put up most of the money to get started. Their car, the Thomas, was a 4-cylinder, 40-horsepower machine with a 3-speed sliding pinion transmission and shaft drive. It was available in 2 body styles, a runabout or a touring car. Unfortunately, the company did not do so well and was sold to Hugh Chalmers 2 years later. Chapin wanted to compete with the new Ford Model T, and so Howard Coffin designed a new car of better quality than the T, but still under $1,000. But they didn't have the money to start a new company, so they reached out to everyone they knew to help run the concern and finance it. They gathered a group of businessmen and engineers to get it started, and the man that put up the vast majority of the money needed was J.L. Hudson. As he did before, Chapin named the company after the man behind the Capitol, and so the Hudson Motor Car Company was established in 1909. Their first car, the Model 20, hit the market in 1910. It sported a 2.5-liter, 22.5 horsepower straight-four engine, 3-speed sliding pinion transmission, and shaft drive to the rear wheels. 3 body styles were offered, a touring car and 2 different roadsters. This car sold very well, with over 4,500 of them sold that first year, putting Hudson 17th place amongst American car makers. Up to that point, Hudson had sold more cars in their first year of production than any other U.S. car maker did in their first year. The company expanded their offerings over the next few years, and by 1913 were selling 2 different models, the 37 and the 54. The Model 37 had a much larger 4-cylinder engine of 4.3 liters, putting out 37 horsepower at 1,500 RPM. Featuring rear drum brakes, shaft drive, and 3-speed transmission, it could be purchased in many body styles: roadster, coupe, touring, torpedo, and even as a limousine. The bodies were built by Fisher until, they were purchased by General Motors in 1919. The Model 54 was the first car equipped with the famous Hudson Super 6 engine. Displacing nearly 6.9 liters, this inline 6 put out some 57 horsepower and, like the Model 37, had a 3-speed tranny, shaft drive, and rear drum brakes. Again, like its counterpart, many body styles were available: 5 and 7 passenger touring, torpedo, coupe, roadster, limousine, and phaeton. Both models were also amongst the first to have Delco starters as standard equipment. By 1916, the Hudson Company claimed to be the largest manufacturer of inline 6 engines in the world and ceased production of their 4-cylinder engines. J.L. Hudson passed away in 1912, leaving his business ventures to his brothers and nephews, as he never married and had no children. At the time of his death, he owned the majority of Hudson, the Detroit Gas Company, several banks, and even a company that made stoves. Roy Chapin would be the general manager of Hudson Motors until his death in 1936. With a brief interruption when serving as the U.S. Secretary of Commerce under Herbert Hoover from August of 1932 until Franklin Roosevelt took office in March of the following year. Hudson would continue making cars with their Super 6 engines until the company ceased production entirely in 1957. Their race cars were quite famous towards the latter years of production, so famous that Doc Hudson became the mayor of Radiator Springs. Thanks for watching Vintage Car History, and we'll see you next week. Peace.